Wouldn't it be great if you could walk out of every single movie you've ever watched with no notes? Of course it would, and of course it's not ever going to happen. They always come with their own issues and flaws, and sometimes you get the feeling that some of them shouldn't have been movies at all. And with that in mind, I'm Josh from Whatculture, and today we're talking about movies that would have been better as TV shows. First up, I Am Legend. There will always be creative changes made to any story when it's adapted to film, whether it's coming from a novel, a comic book, or a video game. Some of these changes are easy to justify, and they make a lot of sense for the medium, while the reason behind others isn't always so clear. Take I Am Legend. Richard Matheson's novel was adapted in 2007 with Will Smith in the lead role as Robert Neville, and it's no exaggeration to say that it completely missed the point of the source material, instead favouring a big CGI finish. In the novel, as the title alludes to, Neville ends up killing so many vampires that he becomes the legend to be feared among them. It's a thought-provoking piece that raises certain questions about humanity and morality, and absolutely none of that was translated onto the big screen. Put this story on the small screen, however, with more time to develop and no need to rush towards a typical and almost cliché finish, and this could have been a lot better. Hell, the sequel that is currently in development and working from an alternate ending that never made it into cinemas would have and could have just been a normal second season without the confusion of picking up from an ending that barely anybody saw. Next up, Clash of the Titans. Epic tales of grand adventure within the fantasy genre have been told cinematically before, and there is always the example of the Lord of the Rings trilogy to prove that it can be done right. However, most films aren't The Lord of the Rings, and plenty fantasy epics are left wanting on the big screen. This could be down to the scale of the story not fitting into the window of a movie's runtime, characters going underdeveloped, or leaving much of the story out. In the case of Clash of the Titans, it's all three. Focusing on one specific character from Greek mythology more than others, there's just so much more that could be explored and could inspire the story. Naturally, the extra time afforded by a series would allow for this, as well as a further exploration of the characters and stories that actually were adapted. Perseus certainly wouldn't have said no to more depth in character, as well as just about all of the supporting characters in the movie. Of course, since there were so many having to fight over screen time, some of them were bound to be left wanting. At the very least, who wouldn't have enjoyed seeing more of the pantheon of gods, something that was so sparingly used in the flick? Next up, Hellboy. Now, this entry is not suggesting that either of Guillermo del Toro's Hellboy movies should have been made as TV shows. However, this duology has proven such a difficult act to follow that in order for the franchise to continue in a new iteration, something different has to be done. Neil Marshall and David Harbour rebooted the property to zero fanfare in 2019, while Brian Taylor and Jack Kesey's The Crooked Man faces a future likely including the same amount of sequels as the previous version got, precisely zero. And while the latter was far better than the former, either of these movies could have had more success taking Hellboy away from the big screen. The Crooked Man at least tried something different, with a very low-budget indie horror type of vibe, but Hellboy is a property that is crying out for a live-action TV show. There's a rich comic history to draw from, with plenty of stories and arcs that could be adapted better with more time across, say, a 10-episode season. This could be approached in similar fashion to how Netflix produced The Witcher, only a little bit better, with an almost monster of the week feel. I mean, who wouldn't want to see Big Red battle a different threat each episode, hopefully with the help of Abe Sapien, as well as others that haven't been properly used on the big screen? Next up, Chaos Walking. There have been plenty of successful movies based around dystopian futures over the years, too many to name really, but that doesn't mean that this specific genre doesn't come without pitfalls. One of which is being able to tell a compelling story at the same time as establishing the world in which it's set. It is a difficult balance to get right, and when a film falls short in this category, there's rarely any coming back. Chaos Walking is the perfect example of this, as a project that had a stacked cast and some interesting ideas, but simply couldn't balance everything within its 2-hour runtime. The premise of the flick, if you don't know, revolves around a male-only society where their thoughts can be plainly heard, which is disrupted somewhat by the arrival of a woman, that being Daisy Ridley's Viola. The film is based on the first of Patrick Ness's book trilogy, The Knife of Never Letting Go, which explores the themes of misogyny and the inner thoughts of the male mind, but one movie simply wasn't enough to adapt them properly. What was ultimately produced felt rushed without giving the story time to breathe or develop. Spreading it out over a series would have allowed a much deeper story to be told, rather than being dismissed as messy with no prospects of the rest of the novels being adapted anytime soon. Next up, Lightyear. With the emergence of Disney Plus in 2019 came an unprecedented opportunity for the House of Ideas, along with everyone else under that particular banner, to venture into storytelling that didn't necessarily need, warrant, or fit a theatrical release. Spin-offs like Pixar's Dream Productions, Win or Lose, and Monsters at Work have been fun projects that didn't have the pressure to live up to the scrutiny and bottom-line expectations that come with Disney films. And this is exactly where Lightyear should have sat. Producing the in-universe film from which Andy's Buzz Lightyear toy was based on was an intriguing prospect, but it also confused audiences. Not casting Tim Allen as Buzz didn't help, as well as the timing of its release. However, even in spite of an array of mitigating factors, Lightyear always felt like more of a novelty side project that fit on Disney Plus than a blockbuster film. There had already been 4 Toy Story movies at that point, and though there is a 5th on the way, revisiting the franchise on the big screen isn't something anyone needed. As a miniseries, having Buzz being based on a TV show instead of a movie, it could have gone a lot further than a big budget release that no one was likely going to pay to see, and ultimately didn't. Up next, Serenity. Not every popular TV show finds success immediately, and some are punished by being cancelled without ever really being given a chance. In spite of lasting just 1 season, Firefly earned itself a loyal army of fans, and 2 years after the season 1 finale came Serenity, a big-budget movie follow-up. The movie, written and directed by Joss Whedon, acted as a conclusion to the show, and it was by no means bad. Certainly, it was better for fans of the show than having absolutely nothing after season 1, but there can be no denying that it would have felt better served as its second season of Firefly. Maybe this is just a case of greed talking, but with its fan base clamoring for more, there was a lot more life left in Firefly as a concept in general. Serenity saw the return of the bulk of the main cast and offered some closure that wasn't given by the end of season 1, but it just could have been so much more if we just got a continuation of the program. This was a project made for a very specific group of people, and though it was well received critically, it understandably flopped hard at the box office, because mainstream audiences just had no interest in it. Had this been produced as a second season of Firefly then aimed at its niche audience, it would have likely been a much bigger success. Next up, Bright. The second entry on this list for David Ayer and the third for Will Smith perfectly demonstrates an issue that many fantasy movies suffer from, in that there were some interesting ideas put forth, but the execution just wasn't there. Bright released in 2017 and was a huge deal for Netflix at the time. The film was based around a Los Angeles that was shared by humans, orcs, elves, fairies, and other magical beings, with racism, discrimination, and elitism being relevant themes throughout. The opportunity was there to tell a compelling story, but just not one that fit within the confines of a below 2-hour runtime. This was a world in which there were at least 2,000 years worth of lore to explore, with multiple different races, factions, cults, and other things to keep track of. Much like Ayer's Suicide Squad, there simply wasn't enough time to allow the story to go deep enough to resonate with audiences. It felt like every other sentence, sometimes more than every other sentence, was painful exposition to try and establish the world in the quickest way possible. Instead, a series would have allowed more time to develop the lore and the world, and not rely on audiences understanding and connecting with multiple different aspects of the story based on just a few lines of dialogue. Hell, there was even a dragon flying in the background at one point. Wouldn't have that been fun to explore even just a little bit more? Next up, Warcraft. Warcraft is the first of a handful of video game adaptations on this list, and is arguably the one that found its audience the most when it released. It was far from a perfect capture of what the games were about, but there was enough in there to leave fans of the game happy. The issue with Warcraft then was with everybody else who went to see it. It was clearly a film designed to please players of the game, which it achieved, but with a reported budget of $160 million, it also needed to reach the mainstream audience to have any hope of being a financial or continued success. Part of the reason why it didn't resonate with more casual viewers was that it relied heavily upon a knowledge of the game's lore, potentially leaving many alienated and far from invested. Like many on this list, more screen time would have been an exponential help in this regard. Time is needed to build out a world like this, something that would have been afforded by a TV show rather than a film. Establish what audiences need to know better and they will find it much easier to connect with the story. It would have to have been on a substantially lower budget, admittedly, but it could have been done and would have had the potential to run for a few seasons at least. Next up, the New Mutants. To start this entry off bluntly, New Mutants never stood a chance of being successful. The film suffered through multiple delays while being stuck in development hell, and when it finally did release, it was greatly affected by the pandemic. With Fox being acquired by Disney at the time, the planned trilogy was all but guaranteed to never see the light of day. However, even taking all of that into consideration, New Mutants just would have been better as a TV show. Again, introducing so many new characters at once was always going to result in them feeling underdeveloped, with a story that felt rushed. Yes, this is how the original X-Men first came together in 2000, but the Avengers changed the superhero genre forever 12 years later. The MCU set the blueprint for how a team would join forces, and though New Mutants would have ultimately failed if it tried to release a Cannonball movie followed by a Magic movie, etc., it may have had a chance on the small screen. The X-Men had already seen TV success, of course with the animated series and later with Legion and X-Men 97, and this is where New Mutants could have thrived. Not as a film that was never going to launch a franchise, but a series that could have told the story and done the plethora of new and unfamiliar characters more justice. Next up, Eternals. Much of what has already been said about Suicide Squad and New Mutants is also relevant for Eternals, in that there were too many characters and too much exposition needed to set up the dynamics of the Eternals, the Deviants, and the Celestials than could be achieved in one, albeit 3-hour movie. On top of all that was how the wider context of the Marvel Cinematic Universe didn't work in Eternals' favour. Yes, there were some references to the wider MCU, but at no point did this feel like a puzzle piece to the bigger picture, and it still doesn't all of these years later. The MCU was built on compelling individual movies that were good on their own merit, but also added to the overall narrative. Outside of the Blade reference in the post-credits scene, something that looks less and less likely to be ever followed up on as time goes by, it feels as though Eternals doesn't have a place in the franchise. People have been desperate for the return of Shang-Chi, for example, but would anyone really miss this race of alien robots if they didn't make a return? With the TV series on Disney Plus instead, there would have been more room for character development. Captain America Brave New World's eventual acknowledgement of the story would have still worked, and there would have just been less overall pressure and expectation for it to connect to anything else in the same way like Moon Knight or She-Hulk benefited from. Next up, Assassin's Creed. Michael Fassbender is one of those actors who can shine no matter how bad the movie around him is. However, even he couldn't make anything out of Assassin's Creed. Whenever anyone talks about the film, they don't mention Fassbender's performance, they just talk about how underwhelming the whole thing was. Particularly when considering the popularity of the source material at the fingertips of the filmmakers, that was mostly completely wasted. The format was there almost begging to be utilized. You've got an assassin in the gaming franchise with however many targets, and it would have been the easiest thing in the world to put someone like Altair or Ezio in a mission per episode kind of situation. Instead, Ubisoft's incredibly popular series was adapted in the loosest way possible, almost unrecognizable from the source material. There were certain aspects that made it into the film, but nothing that was ever going to satisfy either those who had played the games or those who just wanted a good action flick to watch. And it sucks because this was built to be made in an episodic format. It works so well. Next up, Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City. Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City should have been the movie fans had been dreaming of for years. Finally putting the Paul W.S. Anderson cinematic take to bed and rebooting things with a story more faithful to the games seemed like a perfect move. Adapting the first two games, bringing in a cast of recognizable characters, filling scenes with Easter eggs, what could go wrong? Well, for one, trying to adapt 2 games' worth of material, and with a couple of threads from spin-offs and remakes included no less, was always going to be a tight squeeze, with them covering completely different characters in completely different locations. As such, both the Spencer Mansion and Raccoon City storylines felt compromised and rushed, with iconic characters given little room to shine. Even worse, some character personalities were outright changed to the chagrin of fans, something that could have been more convincing if they were given a larger focus across an entire series. There's no reason why this movie couldn't have been split into 3 distinct seasons. Get the initial outbreak in the Spencer Mansion, extend that out to the city in the second, and then introduce Nemesis in the third. Resident Evil deserved more than this hack job, and it was so close to being good. Next up, Ender's Game. There are so many great novel, gaming, or comic book series that have a huge, extensive amount of material to draw from for a cinematic adaptation that ultimately barely scratches the surface. Hell, we've already talked about plenty of them on this list, but few have had as much to draw from as Ender's Game. Imagine being able to pull from 16 novels worth of material spanning literally the course of 1,000 years and only having one film to show for it. Scratching the surface doesn't even come close. Surely a world of this size should have been given at least one series, undoubtedly more, to be told properly. That's not to say that every word of the 16 novels had to be adapted, because of course that's not true, but the film missed out on some of the key points of Ender's Game in general, including the titular character's relationship with his siblings and the military tactical themes that were arguably subbed out in favor of big CGI battles. The passage of time as well is a crucial element in Ender's Game, and so a TV show spanning a few years would have been the ideal choice. Considering how much Ender changes throughout the story, having the children involved grow up extensively throughout the project would actually be a plus, unlike in Stranger Things or Wednesday. Next up, Mufasa the Lion King. After the roaring success of Jon Favreau's live-action remake of The Jungle Book in 2016, the director was quickly put in charge of doing the same for The Lion King. Though the movie smashed it at the box office, fueled largely by its name value, the film itself was poorly received as a pointless remake that brought nothing new to the table and robbed the characters of any kind of emotion. Of course, a sequel was greenlit due to the $1.6 billion global haul, but Mufasa the Lion King brought in less than half of its predecessor, confirming that not every successful project needs a sequel. The idea of delving into Scar's backstory isn't exactly a surprising one, as Disney has often found success in exploring its villains. But the big screen probably wasn't the place for it, particularly when Disney Plus is right there. This is exactly where a series surrounding Scar and Mufasa's youth should have found its home. Not only that, but this story should have headed back to animation rather than the joyless live action. It wouldn't have made as much money for Disney as the film did, but it would have been a better final product, potentially offering more than just a shallow cash grab. But when questioning whether telling good stories or making money is the top of Disney's list, there's only ever one answer. Admittedly, a lot of the time the studio checks both boxes, but not this time. Next up, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Alright, hang on. Like a couple of films on this list, I'm not saying that Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is a bad movie. It's well deserving of its cult hero status and is one of the most vibrant graphic novel adaptations ever made. Edgar Wright's direction is flawless, the cast is perfect, and you'd pinch yourself if your work was adapted like this. That said, would Scott Pilgrim have made more sense as a TV show? Potentially. The film, by necessity, has to condense a lot of the source material, which takes place across a much longer time period in the original 6 books. Characters like Knives Chow get the chance to develop and shine more in the source material, while entire interesting plot lines were omitted entirely. Some of the interplay between the X's is lost in the film as well, which again could be perfect to explore in a longer series that can give better depth to characters who only briefly appear in the film. There's no reason why Scott Pilgrim vs. the World can't exist alongside a more faithful TV adaptation, 2 very different takes on the same material, 2 very much deserving to exist in their own right. Next up, Hitman. Since Hitman first made its debut on the PC back in 2000, there have been 2 major film adaptations. Timothy Olyphant was miscast as Agent 47 in 2007, and Rupert Friend was miscast in the 2015 reboot, and neither iteration came close to capturing what made the games so popular. From the beginning, the player is set up as Agent 47, a mysterious clone trained from birth to be one of the greatest assassins alive. Though each level offers a different mission, there was always a great narrative that ran all the way through, leading to the big finish. Exactly why this format hasn't yet been adapted into a TV show is a head-scratcher. The initial Hitman movie didn't work at all, so when discussions came up for a reboot, what compelled the filmmakers to make all of the same mistakes all over again? Video game adaptations on the small screen that actually faithfully adapt the games rather than taking one or two characters and throwing them into a situation that's nothing like the source material is the simplest route to a Hitman success. A different mission each episode, much in the same vein as Assassin's Creed should be, would be the ideal way to bring Agent 47 to life, with more of the popular supporting characters around him and more. Next up, The Many Saints of Newark. Serenity isn't the only film on this list coming off the back of a TV series, though the circumstances here couldn't have been much more different. While Firefly was cancelled after one season, The Sopranos is widely regarded as one of the greatest shows of all time that went out on its own terms. Frankly though, that it took this long to produce a spin-off is kind of astounding. The Many Saints of Newark offered a look at a young Tony Soprano, benefited by the most perfect casting possible. Michael Gandolfini played the character that his father, James, portrayed for 6 seasons and absolutely excelled in the role. Much like with Serenity though, it felt as though as a concept this had more legs than just a 2-hour film. Cramming the story into a single outing only hurt the project, and though a look into the early years of Tony Soprano is something that any fan of the show would surely have wanted to see, the reception was lukewarm at best. To put this into the context of another all-time great TV show, had The Many Saints of Newark been produced as a TV series rather than a good, not great film, it could have been The Sopranos' Better Call Saul. Instead, it's The Sopranos' El Camino. Next up, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is often remembered as being the movie that ended the film careers of both Sean Connery and director Stephen Norrington, as the two famously clashed on set. But this was just one of many issues that kept the project from success. Bringing together so many characters from so many different walks of life was always going to be a challenge. It's understandable to believe it possible so soon after the success of X-Men's first foray into live action, but not every film can be X-Men. Though none of the characters felt truly developed, it was lead Alan Quatermain who may have suffered the most. He was clearly the anchor point of the story and a living legend in the realms of the narrative, but he felt as wasted as the likes of Tom Sawyer, Captain Nemo, and Mina Harker. There was never even any reference to the fact that the villain was Moriarty, the legendary nemesis of Sherlock Holmes. Alan Moore and Kevin O'Neill's source material isn't exactly extensive, but it is far more interesting than what the movie produced. They would have needed at least 2 or 3 seasons to get through them, but battles lasting for centuries referencing other giant fictional works and alien invasions would have made for a far more compelling watch than a disappointingly generic war plot. Next up, Solo, a Star Wars story. Though there are more on the way, allegedly, to date there have been just 11 Star Wars movies, and there is without a doubt an odd one out. 9 of these make up the Skywalker saga, while Rogue One, arguably one of the best ones, fits perfectly into that narrative, feeding directly into the events of Episode 4. Solo, a Star Wars story, however, is completely removed from the saga, focusing only on Han Solo's backstory, how he came to be associated with the likes of Chewbacca and Lando Calrissian, and answering the question nobody needed or wanted answering, how he got his last name. Han Solo might be one of the most popular Star Wars characters ever, or hell, one of the most popular characters in fiction, but there was no call for a film telling his story, and the box office figures unfortunately reflect that. The project came out in 2018, just a year before Disney Plus launched in the US, which is a shame because this is a story that would have been perfect for that platform. Ahsoka, Obi-Wan Kenobi, brand new characters like The Mandalorian, and even Clone Force 99 have seen great success on Star Wars' small screen. And amongst them, Han Solo could have thrived, instead of trying to cram too much backstory into too short of a runtime. Next up, The Marvels. Though it may have wound up as the MCU's lowest grossing movie to date, The Marvels was better than a lot of what Marvel Studios released around it. Captain America Brave New World, Ant-Man Quantumania, and Thor Love and Thunder, to name just a few. However, the film performed woefully at the box office, grossing a franchise low of just $206 million in the first weekend. It's easy to see why Kevin Feige would want to follow up on the billion-dollar-plus Captain Marvel from 2019, but perhaps the small screen would have been a better place for it. There were likely plenty of casual cinema goers who were put off by the fact that 2 of the 3 main characters had only appeared on Disney Plus shows to date: Kamala Khan in Ms. Marvel and Monica Rambeau in WandaVision. If someone hadn't seen either of these shows, having no connection to or background on 2/3 of the titular team may have been somewhat off-putting. However, the other side of this coin is that it would be a strong reason to keep the story on Disney Plus, potentially even building towards a small screen crossover. Hell, why not keep Haley Steinfeld's cameo and have this build towards a TV-based Young Avengers series or something, much in the same way that Netflix did with The Defenders, but better. Next up, The Dark Tower. Even at the best of times, adapting a single novel into a single movie can prove difficult, with much having to be chopped and changed. What The Dark Tower tried to do, however, was damn near impossible. It's quite difficult to pinpoint exactly what the project was trying to be, as it combined elements from many of Stephen King's 8 novels, while also acting as something of a continuation of those events. It was a mess from its very concept and was clearly trying to push too much into one film. Fans of the series who were expecting to see what they had read appear on screen were greatly disappointed, and those unfamiliar with the source material were given a forgettable, underdeveloped story. Would it have been so difficult then to give audiences a straight-up adaptation of the novels themselves? 1 book per movie worked for Harry Potter, but thanks to the intricacies, the lore, and the story that Stephen King told, 1 book per season would have made more sense for The Dark Tower. Nobody wanted or needed a continuation of the story, but a small screen adaptation of what the novels actually are about would have potentially given it more of a chance. Next up, Uncharted. When Uncharted finally released in 2022 after so many years in development hell, it was fine as far as fun action movies went, but it didn't feel for a second like an Uncharted adaptation should. Characters Nate and Sully were unrecognizable, Elena was completely absent, and the story was a complete mishmash of all 4 games. What was needed here, like with a couple of the games already mentioned on this list, was an actual adaptation of the games themselves. Don't take the characters and shove them into a story that doesn't feel anything like the source material. Actually adapt the stories that have become so popular over time. Hell, Uncharted even has the perfect blueprint to follow in fellow Naughty Dog outing, The Last of Us. Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann's show has, with a handful of relatively minor changes, faithfully adapted the game so far and has been lauded for it. Producing an Uncharted series in this manner then felt like the next logical step. Cast Nate, Sully, and Elena properly and put them in a series that can faithfully adapt the first game, Drake's Fortune, in all of its globe-trotting, treasure-hunting glory, and like The Last of Us, it would be a hit. Further seasons would likely follow, allowing the rest of the games to be brought to life with the necessary time and space not afforded by a single film. And finally, the Thursday Murder Club. With the Thursday Murder Club, Netflix bagged itself a stacked cast, with Steven Spielberg on board as an executive producer to bring to life a light-hearted yet brilliantly intricate murder mystery. This should have been a slam dunk, but unfortunately, the film just didn't do justice to the book. 2 hours simply wasn't enough time to delve properly into Richard Osman's debut novel. The adaptation hit most of the main points, but it barely scratched the surface in terms of character development and the actual details of the plot. In some instances, characters were either left out or had their stories completely changed in order to fit the runtime. But arguably the worst thing about it was the mystery itself. In the book, there are multiple suspects that genuinely feel like they could be the killers, where for Netflix it became a far more basic and bog-standard mystery. This could have been something much closer to Knives Out than it ultimately was. And the key issue here was time. One movie, again, was simply not enough to bring everything from the novel onto the screen, and it felt like a race to get to the reveal as quickly as possible, something that was incredibly underwhelming in itself. While certain aspects are always going to be omitted in situations like this, the Thursday Murder Club left out some of the key pieces that made it so good and so memorable in the first place. So that's our list. Let me know in the comments if you would have liked to have seen these movies be made for TV instead. And if you want more content like this, click one of the videos on screen right now.